Hi friends, it's Rabbi Briskin with a thought for Shabbat. This week's Torah portion called Bo describes the final 3 devastating plagues that cause untold suffering to the Egyptians, as well as the preparations undertaken by the Israelites on the eve of their leaving Egypt. Early in the portion between the 9th plague of darkness and the 10th plague of the killing of the firstborn, we find an interesting directive. God tells Moses to tell the Israelites to borrow objects of gold and silver from their Egyptian neighbors. Furthermore, the text tells us that God disposed the Egyptians favorably toward the people, and that Moses, not Pharaoh, Moses was much esteemed in their eyes. Now, commentators and scholars have always been troubled by this verse. The Hebrew word translated as borrow is sha'al. It can also mean ask or demand. Why would an Israelite ask to borrow something that they have no intention of returning? Remember, they're about to leave the Promised Land. It's not like they're going to mail it back when they get to the Promised Land. Our sages provide many interpretations. One popular interpretation is that taking or borrowing gold and silver was a form of reparations for their 400 years of forced labor as slaves. Another suggests that it aligns with the verse in Deuteronomy that states that a Hebrew slave should not be set free without any payment. Jewish texts teach that a freed slave is to be given a dignified economic start by his former owner, and that provisions for departing slaves is required by Jewish law. And a third interpretation suggests that the restoration of freedom is one outcome of the Exodus, and another is the restoration of the slave's dignity and self-respect, something that could only happen when economic freedom accompanied physical and spiritual freedom. Now, in all of this, the Egyptians are described as willing collaborators. The Israelites didn't steal or plunder. They asked, and they received. Now, what was going on through the mindset of the Egyptians that allowed them to willingly part with objects of such great material value? Rabbi Shai Held's commentary in his book, The Heart of Torah, teaches a lesson by the early 20th century rabbi and scholar, Beno Jacob. Jacob suggests that the Egyptians who endured much suffering during the plagues that was the result in part of Pharaoh's intransigence, actually developed warm feelings for their Israelite neighbors. As Pharaoh's heart was hardened with each successive plague, the hearts of the ordinary Egyptian softened. As Beno Jacob writes, quote, the receptive heart of the Egyptian people was now contrasted to the hard heart of Pharaoh. Peace between Israelites and Egyptians was forged on the eve of the Exodus, and an enduring lesson learned from this experience becomes a commandment. You shall not abhor an Egyptian, for you are a stranger in his land. Close quote. Rabbi Held then reminds us that at the heart of the religious enterprise is the attempt to soften and open one's heart to God and to one another. It's easy to harden our hearts and to let them get hardened. We let disputes fester and wounds go unchecked. But when we can soften our stance, create greater understanding and empathy, and truly look into the heart and soul of another, even one who seems to be so different from us, maybe even an enemy, when we can work to soften our hearts, then we can call that person a friend or a neighbor. Wishing you a Shabbat Shalom, and encouraging you to soften your hearts in the days ahead. Shabbat Shalom.